Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Post. I'm the Systems Librarian here at Eastern. And joining me today is John Nordlof, the Director of the Writing Center here at Eastern. And we've teamed up together again this is the second semester that we're doing this, for a series of research and writing themed workshops that we'll be doing. So with no further ado, I will hand this over to my companion here and we will get started.
Hi, everybody. Yes, my name is John Nordlof. I am the Director of the Writing Center and Writing Specialist here at Eastern University, here on the St. David's campus. I think I'm probably I look across at Chelsea's, at the library here from Walton Hall. We're going to talk about APA format today. And this is a really big topic, or it's a potentially large topic. We will be basing this on the 7th edition of the APA manual, which is this big book here, which has lots and lots of information in it, but obviously we're not going to cover all of that today. But I just wanted people to be aware that that is the edition that we will be using. It's no longer new. I mean, it's been out for 2 years. I still sort of think of it as the new edition, but it is probably for some of you who are starting as college students, it's just the current, it is APA style. So we're going to do a couple of things here. And basically, we're going to be working on just really two basic things, although we'll kind of touch on some other things as well, but how to format a quotation or paraphrase using a signal phrase. And how to format a reference entry for a journal article and a book. Now, again, there's a lot of other aspects to APA format. And of course, those of you who are joining us here today might have questions about other things, and we can touch on as much as we can today if you're interested. Okay, so and again, feel free to go ahead and put comments in the chat, and Chelsea, if you can keep an eye on those and let me know if anything comes up. I'll try to keep an eye as well. I'm going to go ahead and have us take a look at a sample paper, and this is actually from the APA style website. And one of the resources that I tend to use, there are two really good resources for documentation, or for APA in particular. Actually, the American Psychological Association, it does have an APA style website, and that's literally what it's called. If you Google APA style, that's probably the first thing that will come up. And it's actually quite good. And I say that because in the past, they did not have as comprehensive information on the web as they do now. But I think surprisingly, now it doesn't have as much as the actual manual, which I'm sure you can find in the library, but it is pretty substantial. So that's a good place to look. And we're going to look at a little bit of a sample student paper here, and I'll say a couple of things about this as we look. Just to kind of go over and to kind of give you an overview, and then we will look at some specifics later on here. So you can see here, student paper. In APA format, they do ask for a title page. And you can see up at the top, they ask for page number. This is something that is, again, sometimes you will hear people asking for a running head, which means that you have more information up here on the top of each page. But they do not ask that anymore for student papers if you're following that format, okay? But they have your student title of the paper, student name, course, and so on and so forth. And then repeating the title then on the first page of the actual essay or paper itself. Now, the basic move in APA format, if we were together, I'd ask you to raise your hands here. How many of you have used MLA format? My guess is that typically students coming in to Eastern, especially traditional undergraduates, have probably experienced MLA format as a documentation form from high school. Typically, students do a lot of their writing in high school, in English class, right? And that changes for a lot of students in college, certainly does here at Eastern. A lot of students going into, especially into the sciences and social sciences, suddenly you're meeting APA for the first time and it's like, what is this, right? There are some real strong similarities between MLA and APA format structurally. Now, there's some details that are different, but structurally they're actually pretty similar. They use this, what we call an in-text citation format is usually what it's called. And what that means is that in the text, you're going to get information that will tell you where can I find the full bibliographic information of this sort for the particular source being cited here. And that's clued in by the author. And that's what you would have been used to in MLA format. You might say, according to Jones, comma, and then a quotation or paraphrase. And then what we would expect is to be able to go to the work cited at the end, look alphabetically under Jones, and find that source. Now, it basically works the same way in APA format. The real difference is that you're going to see, we're going to use, first of all, we're just going to use last names. A lot of times in MLA, you might use a full name. You're going to use the last name here. So it's not going to be, Margaret Jones. It'll just be Jones, let's say. But the other thing is that you're going to include the year of publication next to the name. Right? So you're always going to have that name, last name, plus the year of publication. And so sometimes we call this an author date style because of that. And and APA is one of actually many. There are a variety of author date styles out there that look an awful lot like APA, but they're not. But they do the same kind of move. So you can see here when we have in these documents, we see here McGeegan and Lair 2007. Okay, White 2000. Yalom and Lesh 2005, and so forth. And in each case, you see author and then date. Now, on this first page here, it seems to be all in parentheses, and that's the one way you can do it, is you can put at the end, after you've cited something, you can put in parentheses the author's name plus the year of publication. So in parentheses, author, comma, year of publication. But then also you can include, and the more typical way usually is to include the author's name in the text, and in which case, and you can see here, you're going to include, like here, this reference, Ball et al. They're kind of in the middle of the page. Well, you can see there, it's the author's name and then the year of publication in parentheses. And then what would follow then would be a quotation or a paraphrase. Okay. Now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here just so we can see. So then what that tells me then is that, okay, I have this reference, Paul et al. And the et al, by the way, that's a symbol that means and others. And it's an abbreviation that APA uses. And basically what you're going to see here is that there's really, you might say, how do you handle multiple authors? And this is one of the things that we find. It's one of the changes that I think people will find moving from MLA to APA. I know I found this to be the case, is that for those of us who work strongly in the humanities, typically works are single author. In English, everything is single author, almost entirely, not entirely, but mostly, or maybe two authors. In the sciences and social sciences, that's not the case. You might have 2, 3, 4, sometimes it's 10, 20 authors or more, especially in the hard sciences. And that reflects that, that research comes. So what happens in APA format, you either include the first author in the text, you either include the first author's name if there's one author. If there's two authors, you include those names. And if there's 3 or more, you do the first author's name plus et al. So you just abbreviate that. But what we're going to find here is that if we go to the references page at the end, Bell et al. So then we see the names, but it's alphabetized here, right? And we see the entries. So again, this looks a lot like MLA. MLA has your works cited page at the end. In APA, we have a references page, but it functions the same way. It's at the end of the document, you start a new page, you put references at the top, and then you use, everything is organized with what we call a hanging indent. And that basically, it's like it's like indentation, like you normally do, only you reverse it. Instead of indenting the first line, you keep the first line flush left for each entry, and then you indent 5 spaces for the rest of that entry. And you can see one of the reason why they do that in both the styles is that it makes it really easy to see alphabetically what's going on. So you can see here how then the last name, or at least that first name that appears, really pops out there at the end. The only other thing I'm going to show you here is you can see when it is, again, here's an example of a 2-author citation, Cohen and Freed, okay? And the one thing to note here is this is one of the kind of complicated things about APA format, is that when it's 2 authors, we use the and, but when it's in parentheses like this, we use ampersand, which just means and, okay? And then in the references, you'll see you use the author's names, and then before the last author, you use the ampersand, okay? So that is a sample paper. I'm going to kind of go back to our PowerPoint here, and we'll take a look at that here. Okay, so now we're going to go and we're going to look at an example here. Yanofsky and Yanofsky 2002 reported, okay? Now we're going to say a couple of words about this little citation here. So again, we see author, we see last names, Yanofsky and Yanofsky. And so that's, and one of the things I think that's going on there, one of the things we get, if we had the first names, we might know something of the gender, and it might introduce bias into reading. And I think that APA just figures, well, we can avoid that by, at least minimize that. I might happen to know Yanofsky and Yanofsky, but if I don't. But you can see here, it's Yanofsky and Yanofsky in this. This would be a narrative citation. And then we have the year, 2002 in parentheses. And so you want to get used to that. You've got the author, and then you put the year in parentheses afterwards in this situation. And one of the things and I think this is a stylistic thing that reflects writing for the sciences and social sciences, which is typically what you're going to be doing when you're using APA format, is that there is a focus on the development of scholarship over time and kind of how it grows. So in this case, we're talking about hypertension. And one of the things I know here is that this article was written in 2002. And so what does that tell me? Right away, that gives me information that when they're talking, in this particular citation, they're talking about the current state of treatment for obesity. Well, what we know here is that, okay, they're talking about the current state 20 years ago, actually more than 20 years ago, probably because they probably wrote the article before 2002. So for a reader, that gives me a lot of information that can be really helpful. How recent is this study? And whether or not it's a good study, I'm going to guess that something has happened in the state of treatment for obesity in the last 20 years, although what they're saying is not much happened in the decades previous. So maybe it is the same, but who knows? But that's helpful information there. Okay, so it's in text. You're going to be moving now. I would expect to move from here. If I wanted to actually look up that source, I would just need to go to the references at the end and look alphabetically down to the Y's, right? So that's very similar to MLA. We do include, in the case of quotations, I would include the page number at the end. And again, that's similar to MLA, although we do include that P period before the number, or PP period if it's two or more pages, right? Although one of the things you're going to find is that in APA format, you will probably be encouraged to to paraphrase more frequently than you're going to quote. My degrees are all in English. We love to quote, and there's some good reasons for that in English and the humanities, because usually the subject of analysis in our case is usually words on a page. We're studying Shakespeare. It's not just his ideas, it's actually how he expressed them in his plays, let's say. So we quote all the time. Whereas in the social science and the sciences, oftentimes the subject of analysis is not words. So when we're reading a source, we're really trying to gather the ideas and to distill them. And that's actually one of the big challenges for a lot of students, I know, is kind of how to do that effectively. Is kind of another subject matter as well. Okay, reference at the end, ordered alphabetically. No first names included for authors, and year of publication included after name. Okay, so and I talked a little bit about this paraphrase and quotation just to make sure we review those terms. Paraphrase borrows the ideas of another writer, but puts the ideas in your own words. Whereas quotation borrows words directly from another writer's. Words in quotation marks are found exactly as found in the source. So I always give the example. Let's say I'm going to quote the Gospels, and say, Jesus said, quote, "Do unto others as you would have done unto you," unquote. Of course, I suppose he didn't really say that exactly. That's a translation, right? But it's but that's what we find in the Bible. If I was going to paraphrase it, I probably wouldn't use that. I think it's especially that word unto. We don't talk that way, right? Or most people don't. So you might say something like, treat others like you'd like to be treated, let's say. Okay, so it's still Jesus' idea from the Gospels, but I'm putting it in my own words. So that's what I would call a paraphrase. And oftentimes it can be used in connection with a quotation. You might say, the way I encourage students to do it, you might say, according to Jesus, quote, or Jesus said, quote, "Do unto others as you would have done unto you," unquote, period. In other words, treat others like you'd like to be treated. Okay, but in the key thing here that I want to emphasize is that regardless of whether you are quoting or paraphrasing, you need to cite. Okay, and so we're going to use, and again in APA format. So I would still say, according to Jesus, treat others as we'd like to be treated. Let's say, but I'd still need to cite that. Now here we have examples of this paraphrase. Baumrind insisted that the subjects of Milgram's study should have been completely informed of the possible effects. But again, that is that narrative citation, narrative citation where they're putting the citation in the text. Baumrind, 1968, insisted, but you could put it at the end. You can see here, one critic insisted that the subjects should have been completely informed of the possible effects on them. And here are some examples of quotations. Now, and I'll just make a note here. Sometimes you might find, in the first one is a good example where it's really kind of a combination of quotation and paraphrase, which is actually a good strategy. Oftentimes there might just be a word or phrase that you can't kind of work around in a quotation, or that you think you want to really emphasize, so you put that in quotation marks. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at these are some examples of signal phrases here, and people like to mix those up, but in the words of, as so and so have noted, Miller and Roth have pointed out. There's good examples of this. I oftentimes go to the Pocket Style Manual, which students should have from English 100 or 102. That's also a good space for resources on APA as well as MLA and Chicago style. So that's another place that you can get information on how to effectively use APA style. Okay, now here we're going to take a look at a journal article citation. And what we're going to find is that, and as you look at APA style, you're going to find that they really emphasize this journal article. And the reason for that is that in the sciences and social sciences, which again is what APA is really designed for, a lot of the citations that they include are going to be journal articles. And the reason for that is that journal articles in sciences and social sciences is where most of the most recent scholarship appears. And that's where new information comes out. Whereas books tend to be like, in the sciences and social sciences, books tend to be things that are written like kind of popular, like sort of distillations of things that everyone already knows, or that kind of thing. But it's not as much where you're going to find the new stuff, the most interesting stuff. Okay, so here's an example. We'll just take a look at this briefly, but you can see here again, it's fairly similar in many ways to MLA style. It uses that hanging indent, and then it goes author last name, comma, first name. Although in this case, we don't use the first name, we use the initial. So in this case, J, Whitmire, comma, JM period. But then we move, in MLA, you'd find the year way down below, but here we move it right up front. We want to know what that year is, so we put that in parentheses. And then we include the title of the article. One of the trickiest things with MLA is remembering this, but they treat the title of the article, they capitalize the first letter, and then everything else is lowercase, except for if you had a colon, you would capitalize the first letter after the colon. A lot of titles have a colon, and then they're going to capitalize. If you had a proper noun, you would capitalize, like Abraham Lincoln. Let's say you would capitalize the A and the L, right? Otherwise, it's lowercase. And then we have, and there's no quotation marks around it, so we know. And again, you might in MLA, you might be used to that, putting quotation marks around article titles, but here we don't do that. But we are going to include the next period, and then we include the title of the journal and the volume. In this case, Social Science Research, comma, 29, that is the volume. And I'll say a word about that in a moment, but you'll notice that those are both italicized. So it's got that slanty font there, and we capitalize the title of the journal just like it would appear on the cover of the journal. So capitalize major letters, or first letters of major words, and then we have a comma, and then the volume. And the volume is like each year that a journal comes out. It's like, a journal comes out maybe 2, 4, 6 times a year. It depends. But each year, the whole year is like a volume. But then in parentheses, they put the issue. And that's, in this case, it's number 4. And so that's like, so in volume 29, there might be 4 or 5 issues. So this is issue 4. And then the page number, okay? Or page numbers, okay? And then the last thing here is what they call the DOI. And again, this is something, they don't really use this so much yet for in the humanities, but in the social sciences and sciences, most of the journals are going to have a DOI, and that stands for Digital Object Identifier. And really what it's trying to do is it's giving a kind of a permanent location on the internet for that citation. And by that, I mean, you've probably had this experience. I know I have this all the time. You go to a website, it's like, oh, this is great information. Then I go a month later, it's gone. Where did it go? It's, it disappeared. And sometimes it's just because, somebody didn't pay their internet bill and they got, turned off or it got moved or something. But at any rate, this is like a permanent, it's almost like a barcode for journal articles, and it's usually this doi.org and then a string of numbers here, okay? And you could click on that, and that should link you to at least the citation, not necessarily the article itself, but the bibliographic information for that. So that appears at the end. In the current edition, we just include it like this with a hyperlink, so that you could click on it, okay? And then the last thing, I'm just going to go briefly over a book, and again, we're using books less often. It's unfortunate. I still like books myself. Chelsea probably does. But you can see it's very similar. Author, last name, comma, first initial, year of publication. We italicize the title, but we use that same capitalization, first letter and first letter for colon, proper nouns. And then period, and then just the publisher. They used to ask you for the location of the publisher. They don't anymore, which is really It makes things a lot simpler. Okay, so that's a book, and again, it follows that same pattern here with the hanging indent. What I'm going to do here then is I'm just going to show you a little bit. We're going to talk about research at another time, but I thought I'd show you a little bit, just kind of following where we would find some of the information if we were actually in the databases. And it's one of the things that would be really helpful for you is to make sure you're using, if you're doing scholar, if you're researching for an article or for an essay in the sciences and social sciences, you really should be using some of the databases. I oftentimes use EBSCOhost, which is a collection of databases. But I know, Chelsea can show you that, as well as other databases that the library has. But a lot of the information that you need, all of the information that you need to do citations, you're going to find in the website. So let's say I wanted to look up I'm gonna look up a topic that I oftentimes work on, and I'm going to see if I can find an article here. So I typed in, so I went to EBSCOhost, I typed in here, and now, okay, I found on this topic of cognitive load. This is a thing I like to think about a lot, but it has to do with how much information we can take in at one time, and how knowing how we learn, which has to do with how much we can take, and how the best way is to bring in new information and use the information that we currently have. They call that cognitive load theory. So I'm always interested in that in terms of student learning. But I put that into our EBSCOhost database here, and I could, by the way, there's all kinds of things you can do here. And one of the big things is just to say, okay, let me look for things that are peer reviewed, which means that there are scholarly articles. And then actually, in many cases, you can actually find that information right here on the Eastern website. So I'm going to look at this citation and just kind of see what we can do here, how we would find that information. So if we had the article itself, one of the things you would see is that typically all that information that I went over with you, you're going to find it usually at the very top of the first page of the article. So in this case, you can see here the title of the article, Instruction, Example Order, and Student Learning, Reducing Extraneous Cognitive Load by Providing Structure for Elaborated Examples. It's a mouthful, isn't it? So that's the title of the article, and then usually right below it or next to it are the authors, in this case, Sam Balkan and Alan Goodboy. And then all of the rest of the information, sometimes it's at the bottom of the page, but in this case, it's actually at the top of the page. We have the journal, Communication Education, so that's going to be there. The year 2020, the volume and issue, and you can see your volume, it's usually abbreviated or often abbreviated VOL 69, so that's that volume that we italicize. And then issue, by the way, sometimes they're also, the issue is oftentimes called the number. And for whatever reason, I think it has to do with, like, maybe it's in Latin, it's spelled this way, but number is usually abbreviated NO period. So if you see NO period, that means number. In this case, number, so that's the issue. And then the page number. And then you can see this does have a DOI, and that appears right there. So you can, all of that information usually is at the top. Now, one of the things that I'll mention here is that you see that this still needs to be formatted. And you're going to, so even if you take this information, you'll notice, for example, they list the author's first name and last name. You're not going to do that. You're going to, in text, it's going to be Balkan and Goodboy. And then in the references, it's going to be Balkan, S and Goodboy, AK. So, and by the way, you're going to keep that order, whatever the order of the authors that's listed, whoever's listed first, that's who should be first. You keep that order because they worked them out. And then also you're going to make sure that the capitalization follows APA. So in this case, it almost does, but not quite, because you can see it's got the I capitalized there, but we would also capital, and then everything is lowercase, but we would capitalize that R after the colon. And also the other place you'll find it, if you're in an EBSCOhost citation, you'll find under detailed records. So you can click on that, and that should give us the information as well. The title, authors, title of the journal, volume, issue, pages. And then usually at the bottom, we have the DOI. You can also click on, and I'm going to show you this, but I'm also going to give you a caveat here. You can hit the cite button, and that should give us information on how to helpful information on how to cite it. And you can see here, okay, and what I usually discover, and this is the reason why I say I give just a caution. It's not always 100% accurate. And in this case, if I look it through Vulcan, okay, the good, author's name's good, year, publication good, and then boom. But notice the same issue that I had when I looked at the title of the journal. This R in APA format, it should be capitalized, and then you can see then, okay, then everything else looks good, but there was that one issue, and that'll happen. So you can use that, but just make sure that you are double checking it, because what we found is, you've probably found that too. Is that right, Chelsea? That's not, those cite buttons are accurate, but not 100%.
Yeah, it's not to be too technical with it, but it has to do with the algorithm that the database itself has set up behind the scenes. And it's pulling specific metadata from the fields within the record itself, but it doesn't know styling. So what this did was it took the title exactly as it is from the metadata and put it within the citation tool, but did not realize that they'd have to capitalize the R to keep with the styling of everything. So yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying it's just a computer, and a computer is not as smart as the human brain. So always trust your head. But this helps with carpal tunnel syndrome. So, I always say that, at least.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, just to keep that in mind. I think this is true for, we're seeing more and more tools that are going to be helpful in terms of citation and all kinds of assets that'll make life easier for us. But we have to sort of, you use that as a tool, but still kind of review, go over things before you kind of click send and send it in. Okay, so that was a little bit of an overview there of APA format. We went over how to cite, do in-text citation, and also a little bit about how to format your paper and how to format reference entries. As I said before, the APA style guide that Chelsea has linked to there, I think is really helpful. I found that that there's probably enough information there to get most students through undergraduate papers. I don't know if it's not quite enough maybe to do like at the graduate level. You're probably, especially if you're in the social sciences, you probably want the big journal here, or the big book. But the other resources would be, again, if you're a traditional undergraduate, you probably have a copy of the Pocket Style manual by Hacker and Summers, and that has, as long as you've gotten in the last year or so, it should have the up-to-date APA format. The other place is the Purdue OWL, Purdue Online Writing Lab, or OWL, has good information on style. So those are all some resources that you can make use of here.